Ever try to find, like, every single picture of a cat on the internet?
Oh, wow.
Sounds impossible, right?
Yeah.
Well, without loops, programmers would basically be stuck writing code forever just for that.
Right.
Luckily, for everyone who loves cat memes, we have loops.
Yeah, loops really are the workhorses of programming.
Yeah.
They power everything from simple calculations to complex algorithms
Yeah.
by allowing us to automate repetitive tasks.
And you've sent over some excerpts from 4.2.pdf,
For
so
now.
we can really unpack this concept.
Yes.
For starters, what exactly is a loop?
In the simplest terms, a loop is like a set of instructions for a computer that comes with a repeat button.
Okay.
As long as a specific condition is met, the computer keeps hitting that button and following the instructions within the loop.
Okay, so it's like setting my phone alarm to go off every 5 minutes instead of just once.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And just like you can customize your alarm settings, programmers can control how a loop behaves through something called a condition.
Conditions. Decisions. The document mentions a loop body. Is this where those decisions come in?
Not quite. The loop body is the heart of the action,
Okay.
the actual set of instructions being repeated. The condition, on the other hand, acts as the gatekeeper, determining whether the loop continues or stops.
So the loop body is the worker bee, and the condition is the manager calling the shots.
Exactly. Think of it like this. You want to make a program that counts to 100.
Okay.
The loop body would contain the instruction to add 1 to the current number.
Okay.
The condition would be, is the current number less than 100?
So as long as the number is under 100, the loop keeps adding 1. What happens once we reach 100?
That's where the condition comes in.
Okay.
Once the number hits 100, the condition is the number less than 100 becomes false.
Right.
Since the condition is no longer met, the loop stops, and the program can move on to other tasks.
That makes sense. The loop knows when its job is done.
Right.
Speaking of jobs, the source also mentions these max value questions. Do these relate to conditions?
Absolutely. Those questions perfectly illustrate how a slight change in the condition can drastically change the loop's outcome. Let's imagine we have a loop that finds the largest number in a list.
Okay, so we've got our list of numbers,
Right.
and our loop is searching for the biggest one. How do these max value questions change things?
Well, let's say our list has the numbers 2, 5, 1, and 4. If the condition is the current number greater than all other numbers, the loop will correctly identify 5 as the max.
Okay.
But what if the condition is the current number greater than the next t number in the list?
That's a trickier condition. Walk me through it.
The loop starts by comparing 2 and 5.
Okay.
5 is greater, so it moves on to compare 5 and 1. Here's where the problem arises.
Okay.
5 is greater than 1, so the loop mistakenly assumes 5 is the max, even though it hasn't compared 5 to 4 yet.
Wow, that's a subtle but important difference. It's like the loop jumped the gun and declared a winner too early.
Exactly. This highlights why choosing the correct condition is absolutely crucial for a loop to function as intended. A small change in wording can lead to very different results.
This is making me think about those loop body instructions again. Are there different types of instructions that can go inside a loop?
Yeah.
Could we say multiply numbers instead of just adding them?
Absolutely.
Right.
Loops can handle a wide variety of instructions, not just simple arithmetic. They're incredibly versatile.
Right.
Let's look at an example from the source material. The idea of squaring a series of numbers using a loop.
Okay, so instead of counting to 100, we're now squaring numbers.
Right.
How would that work within the loop structure?
Let's say we want to square the numbers 1 through 5.
Okay.
Instead of writing separate lines of code for each calculation, a loop lets us streamline the process.
Okay.
The loop body would contain the instruction to square the current number.
So the loop would take the number 1, square it,
Yes.
then move on to 2, square it, and
Yeah.
so on, all the way to 5.
Exactly. The loop would repeat this process, squaring each number in the sequence thanks to the instructions in its loop body. Now, to visualize this entire process, we often use diagrams called flowcharts.
Okay.
They're like roadmaps for understanding how a loop operates step by step. Have you ever seen a flowchart?
I have, but I'll admit, sometimes they look a bit like hieroglyphics to me.
Sure.
Could you decode one for us?
Of course.
The source mentions one that calculates powers of 2.
Think of flowcharts like a comic strip explaining the loop's logic.
Okay.
Let's break down that powers of 2 example.
Okay.
First, we see a box representing the starting point, where a variable called curpower, C-U-R-P-O-W-E-R, is set to 2.
Okay.
Think of variables like containers that hold values.
Okay, so curpower starts at 2. What happens next?
The program asks the user for input, another number which gets stored in a variable called username.
Okay.
Let's say the user enters the number 3. Now the loop comes into play.
So we've got our starting point and we have our user input. Does the loop start working its magic now?
It does. The first thing the loop does is check a condition.
Okay.
Is usernum greater than or equal to 1?
Okay.
In this case, 3 is definitely greater than 1, so the loop begins its work.
Okay, we're finally inside the loop. What's happening in there?
Inside the loop, we have a couple of actions.
Okay.
First, the current value of cur power is printed to the output.
Right.
Since it started at 2, that's our first result.
Okay.
Then things get interesting.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Loop then takes cur power and multiplies it by 2.
Okay.
So now it becomes 4.
Okay.
At the same time, usernum is decreased by 1, becoming 2.
So it's like those variables are juggling values,
Yeah.
passing them back and forth with each step.
The very organized juggling act.
All right.
Now here's where the loop shows its elegance.
Okay.
It circles back to the condition.
Okay.
Is usernum, which is now 2, still greater than or equal to 1?
It is.
Yes.
So the loop isn't done yet, is it?
Not at all.
Okay.
The loop diligently runs, again, printing 4 this time, the updated cur power value.
Right.
Then it multiplies cur power by 2 again to get 8 and decreases usernum down to 1.
This is making that flowchart suddenly make much more sense.
Good.
But how does the loop know when to finally stop?
That's where a condition comes back into play.
Okay.
Eventually, after a few more cycles, usernum will become 0.
Right.
At that point, the condition is usernum greater than or equal to 1 becomes false.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So the loop, like a good worker bee, sees that the condition isn't met anymore and knows it's time to clock out.
Precisely.
Okay.
The program can then move on,
Right.
having successfully calculated our powers of 2.
Right.
These flowcharts really help visualize how the information flows within a loop, don't they?
They really do.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that loops could handle more than just math,
Yes.
which leads me to a fascinating example in the source. The Ancestors printing program.
Right.
Sounds like we're about to time travel using code.
It does sound like science fiction.
Yeah.
But it cleverly highlights how loops can be used for more than just calculations.
Okay.
Imagine wanting to calculate the approximate number of ancestors you had alive in, say, the year 1940.
Okay, so instead of numbers and squares, we're now dealing with family trees and generations.
Right.
How does a loop even begin to tackle that?
It starts with a simple fact.
Yeah.
You have 2 parents.
Okay.
Each of your parents also had 2 parents, and so on.
Right.
This creates a pattern of exponential growth as we go back in time.
So it's like a family reunion that keeps doubling in size every generation we go back.
Exactly.
Right.
The Ancestors printing program uses a loop to simulate this exponential growth, calculating the approximate number of ancestors you had in each generation back to the target year,
Okay.
which in this case is 1940.
Let me guess. The loop's condition has something to do with making sure we don't accidentally end up calculating ancestors from the Stone Age.
You're catching on.
Okay.
The loop uses a condition that checks if the current year it's calculating is greater than or equal to the input year, which is 1940. As long as it is, the loop keeps calculating the number of ancestors for each generation, going back roughly 20 years at a time.
20 years?
Yeah.
Is that some kind of average time between generations?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a simplification, of course,
Right.
but it helps illustrate the point.
Okay.
Each loop iteration represents a jump back in time by 20 years.
Right.
And the loop keeps jumping until it hits 1940.
This is incredible.
Yeah.
It's like we're tracing a family tree, not through dusty photo albums, but with lines of code and a clever loop.
And that's the beauty of loops.
Yeah.
They can be applied to such a wide range of problems, from abstract mathematical concepts to real-world scenarios like genealogy or even simulating the spread of a virus.
That's a pretty big jump from family trees to viruses.
It is.
It sounds like the possibilities for using loops are pretty much endless.
Yeah.
But before we get too carried away, what does all of this loop magic actually mean for someone who might not be, like, a coding whiz?
Right.
How does this impact their daily life?
That's a key point. We don't see the loops themselves, but they're the silent force behind so many things we take for granted.
Right.
Think about scrolling through your social media feed.
Okay, so instead of generations or numbers, now we're talking about endless memes and status updates.
Yes.
How do loops fit into that?
Every time you scroll and new posts appear, a loop is probably working behind the scenes to fetch that data and display it seamlessly on your screen.
So every flick of my finger is triggering a loop somewhere.
It could be, yeah.
working tirelessly to keep my social media feed fresh. That's both impressive and a little scary.
It highlights how essential loops are.
Yeah.
It's not just about social media. Think about online shopping, streaming services, video games.
Right.
They all rely heavily on loops to function.
Loops are like the unsung heroes of the digital age,
Totally.
quietly powering our online world.
Precisely.
Uh-huh.
They really are the workhorses behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And it goes even further. Loops are essential for data analysis, scientific simulations, financial modeling. Any field that processes large amounts of data benefits from their efficiency.
We've gone from cat pictures to complex simulations in this deep dive. It's clear that loops, though a simple concept at their core, are incredibly powerful tools.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is that the concept of a loop can be applied beyond just programming.
Okay.
It's a way of thinking about solving problems by identifying repetitive patterns and finding ways to streamline them.
That's a really interesting thought. So even if someone isn't a programmer, understanding the idea of loops can help them in other areas of life.
Absolutely. It's all about recognizing those looping opportunities in everyday tasks, whether it's automating a spreadsheet at work or finding a more efficient way to organize your to-do list.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of loops, from their basic definition to their almost invisible yet essential role in our digital lives.
It's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you.
And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this journey into the heart of how computers tackle repetition. Until next time, keep on looping.